Hello, and welcome to our Lunar Reflections podcast, where we'll be journeying with the moon while Jupiter's in Cancer. Each month, we'll release an episode to coincide with the new moon, and today's episode is the moon in Scorpio. My name's Tara Stevenson, and I'm a British astrologer.
And I'm Helen. I'm a astrologer from Scotland in the UK.
We're really excited to be joined by a brilliant astrologer today, Janessa. Hi, Janessa. Thank you so much for joining Lunar Reflections. It's a pleasure to have you on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm Janessa. I am mainly a Hellenistic astrologer. I incorporate a little bit of modern here and there too. And yeah, I've been practicing for, I should know this, about 3.5 years at this point. And yeah, I love it. So,
Great. No, thanks so much for joining us today. So today we'll be discussing the moon in Scorpio, and we have not one but two astrologers with their moon in Scorpio, because Helen, my lovely co-host, is also a Scorpio moon, so we get two for the price of one. Yay. I'd also like to say that and add that it's a Virgo moon today, ruled by a Mercury retrograde in detriment in Sagittarius. So apologies in advance. So if we move on, because the moon is exalted in Taurus, by default, the moon is in fall when in Scorpio. And we did touch upon essential dignity during our moon in Cancer episode, but it's probably a good idea just to explain it again here, like really briefly. So essential dignity is a simple technique that looks at a planet's condition in each of the 12 signs, and they are said to either be in domicile, which is the natural ruler of that sign. So, for example, the sun is domiciled in Leo. Stephen Forrest says that there's a general agreement, there's no friction here. Conversely, when it's detriment, this is when it's the opposite of the natural ruler of that sign. So, for example, the sun is in detriment in Aquarius, and this opposition brings complexity and paradox. When a planet is said to be exalted, we see it as uplifted and strong. For example, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. And conversely, when a planet is weakened or depressed, we say that it's fallen. For example, Mars is fallen in Cancer. And then you also have this kind of fifth subset, which is peregrine. And this means to wander and relates to planets that are pretty neutral in those signs. They lack a clear agenda. For example, Venus is peregrine in Gemini. I think it's important to clarify here that when we talk about essential dignity, we don't fall into the trap of saying that a planet is good or bad, depending on what sign it's in. And when we think about the moon, it's conditioned by our instincts, and Taurus is closest to our instinctual nature. And, not to offend anyone on the podcast, but Scorpio can overthink, can overanalyze and distrust. And I think Taurus is very steady and consistent. Scorpio can sometimes be unpredictable, emotionally turbulent. And Sparkly Cat, who I love her writing, by the way, she talks about this kind of hyper independence and resourcefulness of Scorpio's nature, which can sometimes be at odds with the moon's need to connect with others. I'd be really interested to, before we go into like the individual chart, like what you both think about the moon's fall in Scorpio generally. So what about you, Janessa?
sure. Yeah, I do think I agree with a lot of what you said. And yeah, I think planets in their fall or in detriment really just have to do things differently. And so I do see those types of placements, the moon in particular, as like being very creative and um yeah, just going about things in a different way to get those needs met. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point around doing things differently. It doesn't have to be right or wrong. And I think too often, especially when we're kind of reading about it in social media or wherever, there's this like need to kind of decide whether something's good or bad. And it's really just about doing things differently. What about you, Helen?
Yeah, thinking about exaltation, had a look back at some of my textbooks, and the planet in exaltation is explained that it receives honor and respect. So whereas a domicile ruler is kind of like the day-to-day manager, it's like the planet who's in charge of that sign as well as having an affinity and comfort there. The exaltation ruler is more like the owner or someone who maybe shows up and has the red carpet rolled out for them. They're given high honor and esteem there. So conversely, a planet in fall is said to have been, this is in Hellenistic approach, not respected, not heard, not noticed. in disgrace or downfall. And obviously that many of these texts are quite didactic in nature, so they lay it out in very extreme terms. I think practitioners in the Hellenistic era would have done as we do and synthesize any given chart that they're looking at. I thought one of the things that was interesting about that, which Charles Obert pointed out, is that from a psychological lens, it could then be a planet that is not heard within our psyche. So for example, with regard to the moon, what that could manifest as is a part of yourself that you don't listen to, and that's linking to needs, and that kind of core nurture and sense of embodied life that the moon brings. And I think that's quite interesting for me because I've got an exalted sun and a fallen moon. And I think when I was younger, I was quite a bit more driven by achievement and things like that, maybe to the neglect of my emotional life. And I think that's maybe one really literal manifestation of that.
Oh, that's really interesting. I think I like your analogy. I think sometimes these abstract ideas can feel a bit nebulous, but when you kind of root them in like everyday language, then it becomes a lot easier to kind of understand. And I think what is really important is obviously you don't look at these placements in isolation. It's like you've got a really interesting chart in that, your sun's exalted but your moon is falling. And when you're having to deal with these kind of duality of things, it adds that complexity for sure. So yeah, looking forward to hearing a bit more about both of your charts natally. But before we do that, I thought it'd be good for us to talk a little bit about the new moon, which is happening in Scorpio next week on the 20th, and it's at 28 degrees. So it's, for me, closing Scorpio season with a bit of a bang, because there's this Scorpio stellium. We're going to have the moon, sun, Mercury, and Venus. And the first thing I noticed when I looked at the chart was that obviously Mercury retrogrades back into Scorpio literally the day before on the 19th. And I think that's pretty significant. It's going to retrograde all the way back to 20 degrees. So I would ask listeners to think back to maybe mid-October, like the end of Libra season. What was going on for you then? Because you might find yourself kind of circling back to those themes, especially if you have fixed placements around that degree in Leo, Aquarius, Taurus, and Scorpio. So in my part of the world, it's also a Scorpio rising chart in this new moon, and it's pulling in this grand water trine that we've been experiencing for a little while now. And I think, when we think of water trines, they create emotional flow, there's healing, there's this deep kind of inner receptivity. I think there's an intensity to it because, we've got this Scorpio stellium, but I think the supportive nature of Jupiter and that kind of structural, integrative nature of Saturn means it might not feel so overwhelming. I think it's a great time to face old grief, emotional truth. In fact, it might be unavoidable to do that. But I think we can also anchor our kind of spiritual practices more deeply during this time. And I also saw Pluto in Aquarius, and while it kind of enters the mix to create this kind of kite aspect by sign, not degree, that I think there's a deeply transformative kind of edge to this new moon, kind of asking us like, what do we need to change? What do we need to do differently, even though it is a new moon? This new moon will be in my fourth house of home and family, pulling in the other dark houses, 8 and 12. So I'm ready at this point. Janessa, what's your thoughts on this new moon that's coming up?
Yeah, a lot of similar themes, I think. One of the keywords that came to mind immediately was like nostalgia. And this, with all the planets retrograde, Scorpio has a tendency to like reflect and like overthink, right? Like you mentioned. And everything's just kind of looking backwards right now. So I think nostalgia is a good keyword. But I think that there is something really benefic happening from that, right? Like with Venus co-present, even though she's in detriment, and Jupiter in the mix, that grand water trine, I think really is helpful in some way for like moving through something or revisiting maybe something that you were working on. For me, it's like in my ninth house, so I'm like kind of excited about it. Like it sounds like great for some creative projects and things that I want to work on. But yeah, I like it for a new moon for sure.
Oh, that's nice having it in your ninth house. I'm excited for you. Yeah, that'll be really nice. What about you, Helen?
Thanks. Yeah, it's very much a first house new moon that's happening locally. And I had some, similar things struck me as what you were both saying with the Mercury. When I've cast this chart for the exact new moon, I've got Mercury basically cazimi, so it's within a degree of the new moon. So there's this, I think, touching on what you both were saying, there's this juxtaposition between the backwards looking mental energy of Mercury with the new moon symbolism of rebirth and the seeds of a new cycle. And I think that's really interesting. It's likewise for me, it's actually in my ninth house. If you use Placidus, which I have recently been going through a phase of working with whole sign houses and Placidus simultaneously. And so thinking of this is also conjunct to my Scorpio moon as well, within a few degrees. And obviously for listeners, it would be good to sort of think about wherever this lands in your birth chart, because as Tara said as well, we've got Venus in the mix. There's this whole stellium of personal planets, and they're in Scorpio, one of the deepest environments, if not the single deepest environment that there is in the zodiac, while it's in this grand trine with the traditional outers, if you like, or the social planets as they're called in modern astrology, Saturn and Jupiter. And I think that in that sense, it feels like Scorpio is quite a kind of intense focal point for emotional energy. And I think I'll be quite excited as well to see how that plays out.
Yeah, no, and when you were both talking, I was thinking back to the full moon we've just had in Taurus and how that threw up quite a lot, like unexpectedly intense. It felt very powerful, and I feel that there's a continuity of that. Obviously we're in Scorpio season, and I think it's not lost on us because we've been doing this for a few months now that the new moons initially started at the right beginning of the season and now they've kind of flipped to the end. And so it's kind of that duality, like you said about the Mercury retrograde, like going backwards, but then looking forward. And then we're coming to like the culmination of Scorpio season. So yeah, super excited to see where that takes us. So let's get to the nitty-gritty. I'd love to know more about your chart, Janessa, and specifically around your Scorpio moon, like where it is, what aspects, how you kind of, yeah, what's been your lived experience?
Sure. So my moon is at 0 degrees of Scorpio. And then it's co-present. I have Pluto at 9 degrees. I have Mercury retrograde at 10 degrees Scorpio, and then I have Venus at 14 degrees. Um, as far as aspects go, and this is in the ninth house, whole sign. As far as aspects go, I don't really have a ton. It's mainly that it's trine my 0 degree Pisces ascendant. So that's kind of lovely. And then my sun is actually, I'm a new moon, but my sun is at like 28 degrees and 52 minutes of Libra. So that kind of flavors things. And then I also have a Libra Mars ruling that. So that Mars is kind of like a sneaky player, I think, in my whole Scorpio stellium that really changes the flavor of my birth chart. My chart ruler is also ruled by Mars in Aries. So yeah, it's that Mars is the sneaky one.
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting chart because you've got all that kind of concentrated energy in Scorpio, but then you've got like Libra, Mars going, well, look, I'm the ruler here. I might not be the loudest, but I'm the one kind of like controlling everything. That's super interesting. Do you find it, because it sounds like also this new moon that you're gonna have is like a return, like a Mercury return, a Venus return. Like there's lots going on there. How do you find separating out those kind of individual placements? Like how do you kind of understand your Scorpio moon with all of the other stuff going on around it?
Yeah, that has been really tricky. Um, I think especially with the sun in fall and
Mm,
then the moon in fall and then Venus in detriment, it's kind of like, well, which one is it? And Mars also in detriment. So it has been, a little bit of there's been difficulty like unraveling that. And I don't know that it's even right to try to do that, right? Like
mm,
I think I've kind of come to terms with like, well, it could really be any of them, depending on the day. Um, but I do see like the moon in particular showing up, moon and Venus in Scorpio. I feel like those kind of echo each other a lot in terms of like themes around like scarcity or like, maybe the lunar piece of it is more about like the body and like not really realizing I had needs. Or like, I think part of
mm,
this shown up a little bit and with that Mercury retrograde as like um coming to find that I think that I'm neurodivergent. I know we've talked about this just briefly before. But yeah, just kind of not even realizing I had a body, I feel like, until I was like well into adulthood. And not accommodating myself in the ways that I could have been all of this time, or not like realizing that there was even a need there, like Helen was kind of saying, being a little bit blind to some of those things, or just being able to power through. And it's like, well, I can do a lot with very little, and I don't need any help, or I don't need like nice things, or I could just like get by and I'm fine. But like, is that really how I want to live my life? Like, I
Yeah.
don't really think so. So yeah, there's been a lot around that for sure.
No, that really makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. It kind of makes me think back to what Sparkly Cat was saying around that resourcefulness. And because I think Scorpio does come across so competent at doing things themselves, like there isn't always this obvious like need um for the outsider. So I can imagine as the person having that, having to recognize that within yourself as well. And I think when you approach like the second half of your life, you can look back and see like, okay, so this is what's going on. And I think we've all had like similar-ish journeys in terms of discovering our neurodiversity later in life. So it's interesting that you've got this Mercury retrograde and that's kind of like brought it all together. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. And I will talk a little bit more about your Scorpio moon at 0 degrees because I think that's super interesting. But let's flip to Helen because you've got quite a different chart. I think your moon's quite late in the degrees from what I remember.
Yeah, that's right. So it might be an interesting contrast because mine shows up in the it's just in the Jupiter ruled term. So in the third decan, and so it's probably a bit of a different environment. But interestingly, I've got a fixed Venus and Moon too. My Venus is opposite in Taurus, so some of the work for me is not being separating out, but working with those two very different energies. I mean, they both have that fixity, and they both have. I think when you've got those two most relational of planets in fixed signs, there tends to be quite a kind of sense of loyalty and that kind of like seeking a deep, meaningful attachment, particularly from the Scorpio side. The Taurus Venus is a little bit more kind of earthy with it and a little bit more grounded and a little bit more self-oriented, whereas I think Scorpio can be very attuned to the emotional environment and undercurrents in particular. So I think it was only in recent years when I sort of came to be a bit better at separating out where my own emotions and needs are and those of others that I'm picking up. So I think what I'm trying to say is that with Scorpio Moon's sensitivities and radar for other people's emotions, it can be very easy to be focused on them without realizing that you are neglecting your own needs. And I think it's been later in life that I've come to realize that it's not selfish to focus on your own needs to the purpose of sorting through them, understanding them. And in fact, that actually can be to the benefit of others around you rather than being in any way kind of self-indulgent, as I think sometimes we culturally think. And I don't know, Janessa, obviously you've got more planets in Scorpio. Does any of that sound familiar to you as well, or is your experience been different?
Yeah, totally. I think what you were saying about like the depth and like maybe not feeling like you lose yourself so much in the depth of the relationships and like the intensity or something there. Like I think I could see that as something I do. It's like I do take it to that next level. But I agree with what you're saying about that intuitive nature, that Scorpio has, and the ability to see what other people need and to like feel it very easily, and like kind of maybe losing yourself in that and like not meeting your own needs first. Um yeah, I see a lot of that reflected in my experience too.
Yeah, and I'm just like reflecting on kind of both your charts and just where like both of your Scorpio placements live. And I can kind of get my head around the ninth house and the fact that, it's quite a immersive house, you can really get into like the weeds of everything, which is like what Scorpio kind of enjoys. But then, having it ruling like the 11th, which is a very public kind of sociable house. I was just wondering, Helen, how you found having Scorpio rule your 11th house and have the moon there.
Yes, it's in my 11th whole sign house and Placidus ninth house. So yeah, it's I think that for me that manifests in group environments and collectives of all kinds, where I feel I tend to be quite hyper attuned to dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, and I can almost see them not visually, but I can just perceive them in the air, especially in person. It's something uh, ever since the COVID pandemic, when we kind of partly do everything online. When I find myself in in-person environments, I remember how overwhelming it can be just to see all of that. I guess it comes back to again to the kind of doing the work yourself. You sort of realize once you know your own part in things, it becomes a lot clearer and less overwhelming because there's a separation. And I think very much as an area for work for me
Mm.
in this lifetime is like finding the way and extent to which I belong. And so I think that's very important and something I've worked at and something that I can actually be successful in and have been, but it's not something that just comes easily, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
No, that does make sense. And I guess, we've got the planet of belonging moon, like how you feel safe in a house that's about belonging and how we connect. So I can see how, you've got that kind of duality there. Like moving back to you, Janessa, you've talked about your Scorpio moon at 0 degrees. I'd love to know a little bit more about I know it might feel clouded with all the other things going on in that house, but like what's your experience of having a placement at like critical degree, especially because I guess your ascendant is also at 0, but there's quite a nice supportive kind of trine going on there.
Yeah, I think with the trine aspect, it's like I don't really even know how nice that is, kind of where it's like
Mm,
um, Pisces is already kind of intuitive or very intuitive, and then getting the moon trining that from Scorpio is like I think I've had a lot of intuition my whole life. But the flip side to it being Scorpio is that I've ignored a lot of that, or I've like have downplayed that in different scenarios or not listened to that. So um yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, and something that was kind of coming up when Helen was talking about having her moon in the 11th house, like I feel like having mine in the ninth with all of that other stuff is like really um been my experience has really been having a lot of intensity around like my interests and like my hobbies and like the research and really wanting to get to the heart of things, like the truth aspect of
mhm,
the ninth house. And then having Pluto there too, kind of being being very off-putting to people or like and maybe it's like hyperfixations or things, very special interests that I have that and I bring those up or share or express those things with other people. They don't always maybe get it or appreciate the intensity with which that comes through. So yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and that this will being key to like kind of who I am, right? With the trine
yeah.
aspect.
Yeah, no, I think that makes so much sense. I think by nature, as neurodivergent people, we can very much hyper fixate. And I think when you have, especially fixed signs in the mix, it's kind of like we're not letting go here. We're still in this rabbit hole. Um, and so, yeah, there's this intensity with which we kind of deep dive. And I think Scorpio, out of all the signs, is like so adept at doing that. But then sometimes it can be almost to like your own detriment because I'm talking from experience, and I've got Pluto on the IC, so I think I'm quite Plutonian. It's just like, okay, you haven't thought about anything else or done anything else because you're just focusing on, and it can take over. So I can definitely see how that kind of Scorpio stellium in the ninth house can do that. And going back to your thing around like intuition and not always kind of listening to yourself, like whenever I speak about a Scorpio, I always talk about this like thin line between intuition and paranoia and like knowing the difference. Knowing the difference is like the key. And I think that only comes with time. And that kind of lovely Pisces rising can really add weight to that intuition and just knowing and discerning the difference. So yeah, no, I think that's super interesting. I want to talk a little bit about progressed moons because obviously you've both got fallen moons, but the progressed moon gives you this kind of, I don't know, chance to experience a different moon, albeit on like a different like plane as it was. So Janessa, what's your currently do you track progressed moons by the way, and how is if you do, how has this kind of shown up for you?
I do. I just haven't looked in a little bit, so I want to make sure that I'm pulling
No,
it up.
no worries.
Uh, if maybe Helen wants to go
Yeah,
first. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, because you've got quite an interesting progressed moon at the moment, haven't you, Helen?
Yes, it's an unusual one for me. So it's in Gemini, which I'm in a kind of air deficient chart. Although I have got my IC, lot of fortune, and North Node in Gemini, so it's maybe not a completely
Mm.
alien energy, but just no planets. So the moon crossed the threshold literally the same hour as Uranus did, which was super intense. This was the sixth whole sign house as well. I felt it immediately, and they've now thankfully separated because Uranus has gone retrograde, and all that will obviously bring coming back into Taurus and opposing my natal Scorpio moon. But that aside, now the progressed moon is broken free a wee bit, and it's kind of got free. But I think what the way I'm finding that is just, and it links with everything we were just talking about there, actually, in terms of um mental focus. And I think I've had that hyper fixative because I've been really working hard on aspects of starting my astrology and Reiki business and my studies. I've just started a diploma course, and but all I've managed to combine that with being flighty at the same time and sort of moving between, focusing on one thing really deeply and then focusing on another thing really deeply. So I've managed to combine those scorpionic, you know, deep search for truth traits with the Gemini curiosity and restlessness. So it's been a really interesting type of energy. But it's just mentally quite full on, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think it's interesting because obviously you say you don't have much air in your chart anyway. So I can imagine how, especially with Uranus, like if they moved in at the same within the same hour, how intense that must have been. But I think it's quite interesting that you are kind of like flitting around a little bit more and like getting kind of that Gemini energy. And I do think both Gemini and Virgo, obviously ruled by Mercury, there is a lot of mental stimulation that it's almost like you can't turn off the brain like this because there's so many things that you kind of want to do, and that must feel, obviously Gemini is in conjunct to Scorpio, so it's like completely different energy, but at least you kind of can assimilate it into like your own kind of way of being. And I guess before Gemini, you had it in Taurus, which was the exact opposite of Scorpio. So there's probably a lot of learning there as well.
Yeah, that was the progressed new moon over in Taurus. And honestly, I think because of natal Venus there, it felt a wee bit more familiar, a bit more
Mm.
kind of natural, even though it's opposite the natal moon. But whereas, as you say, it's the inconjunct aspects about as different as you can get, and it's definitely a big contrast from that point of view.
Yeah, no, for sure. So Janessa, I'm waiting with bated breath now. Where's your progressed moon?
I'm glad I checked because I haven't looked in a while. And so it's at 0 degrees of Aries.
Oh.
So and my progressed sun is in Sagittarius. So I kind of just got through that like first quarter moon phase. And that I felt really strongly with like starting my astrological studies and um yeah, really just it really is a whole new chapter of my life really since 2020. So that has been really a very not always pleasant, but like I'm really happy for the changes that I've made with that first quarter moon and now with it going into Aries, I have really noticed a shift in like feels a little lighter, right? Like we're
Mhm.
away from Pisces and Saturn with by transit, but then and away from like the Saturn square. So I have Saturn and Sagittarius natally too. Um, but I think yeah, starting to get to the trine and then um being in Aries, there's like more, I feel a little more free, a little more carefree or like ready to like take action on things. Um, a little bit less like caught up in the emotional piece and a little bit more, yeah, just ready to go. And it's a familiar energy for me too with Jupiter there. It's also where I have my North Node at like 0 degrees of Aries. So yeah, it's familiar and it feels good,
Oh,
I'd
that's
say.
nice.
Yeah.
That's lovely. It's lovely that it's conjunct your natal north node and you've just checked and it's at 0, which is like literally the beginnings. I think, anything that moves into Aries is just gives you that bit of energy. And I think it's lovely that you've also got this sun angular in the 10th house in terms of like you said, your trajectory in career, and that trine will be really supportive as well. So I we love progressions because it really does give you that lens away from the natal chart, and you can see it working in kind of subtle or not so subtle ways. So yeah, no, really interested to hear about both your progressed moons. I was going to move on to I have been doing altars for like the last few months and like a big fan. I've got a fallen Venus and a fallen Mars. So I just wondered if any of you have done any kind of lunar remediations or wore talismans or done anything to kind of, yeah, offset the fact that your moon is fallen. Janessa?
Sure. Yeah. Lots of things. Um, I would say that um like more than any type of like talisman or materia, I've really just kind of leaned into like Taurus things in general and like, instead of feeling like I can't buy myself something or I can't like do this beauty thing or these certain things, like just kind of giving those things to myself and like questioning it less has been like, it sounds very simple, but that's been big, big for me. And I think I've studied a lot in the past year and a half or so with Britten LaRue. I took her Moon to Moon course, which I can't recommend enough. And so I feel like there's been a lot of like, she uses a lot of like inner child healing, like internal family systems, like a lot of like somatic kind of work too. So that has been very helpful into like remembering I have a body and like feeling into that and really tapping into my own like needs and wants and just giving them to myself, giving myself permission to
I
have
love
those.
that. No, I really love that. And I think you kind of underestimate the power of working in with intention. And I love the fact that you're kind of leaning into that Taurus energy to kind of remind yourself. I think it's a really, like you say, it's really simple, but I do think the most simplest of things can be the most effective because, you don't have to overcomplicate these things. And it's great that you've kind of got the astrology kind of experience to know about these different ways that you can do, work with your moon. And for anyone that's like listening with a Scorpio moon or kind of any kind of planet that's fallen, I do highly recommend like remediation or just doing something that can kind of bring the balance back. Helen, have you been doing any kind of things with your moon?
Yeah, so I haven't managed to maintain a consistent practice with anything more formal, and I think it's interesting, and in the sense that I would connect with what you both said is that I think remediation can take so many different forms, and it's finding whatever works, and it's really I suppose it's in the modern astrology parlance it would just be working with the energies and but also the correspondences. So I do things like wearing moonstones and wearing white, giving money to charities that I feel that are good for my compassion. Just more broadly, not even so, some will say charities and causes related to women and children specifically, because the moon rules over that. But I think any form of compassionate thing like that. And the other one, and this was actually after we had the Libra Moon episode with Michelle, who has a third house moon. We talked about the joy of the moon in the third house. And I started leaning more into actually just local walking, which is something I've always done as a form of connection, a form of regulation, and actually, in a way, being able to think of that as remediation for the moon, as like my gift to myself, to my body, and also that aspect of the moon that has to do with just the connectivity between the cosmic world and the kind of local and grounded material. I think for me, that experience, just connecting that and doing it in an intentional way that connects with that, has actually been, I'm really glad she suggested that as a form of lunar remediation, because I immediately thought I'm going to do that, and it's been really, really helpful to do that. So yeah.
Love that. That's so beautiful, and it's so effective because I guess you can kind of forget that the moon rejoices in the third house, and just by even, once a month when the moon is like obviously in your house, which is Pisces, for me it's Libra. Um, yeah, when the moon is there, just being able to connect in that simple way. I love that that's kind of helped. And I do think anything to do with the moon doesn't have to be ostentatious. It doesn't have to be big or, loud. It can be something so, so simple because the moon is so gentle and so receptive, and we are very connected whether we acknowledge it or not, even the simplest of things. And I think, we've all spoken today about the word intentional. And I think I'm starting to realize as I work closer with the planets, it's just that intent. It can just be a thought, can trigger all of these different kind of changes within. So, you know, obviously we're born with the chart that we're born with, but it doesn't mean that we can't work with it, and you can grow with it. I think the chart can grow with you, and you can, I'm constantly finding out new things about my chart. I don't think we'll ever stop learning about the ways in which our chart kind of shape shifts, even though it's static at the same time. I just think, yeah, it's magical. Now those are some really good ideas, which kind of segues into practical tips. Like, have you got any kind of tips that you think works when working with the Scorpio moon during the lunar cycle? Because I think, one of the first things that listeners can do if they haven't already is just starting to track the moon and track the cycle, and just listen to, how your body and your mind changes throughout the cycle. And specifically the Scorpio moon, we've got this beautiful new moon next week, which would be a great time to kind of start that. So, Janessa, do you have any kind of tips with working with the Scorpio moon?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, my lunar returns are like very hit and miss. Like many times it's like, oh, like this is like the most annoying thing to happen this month. Like, oh yeah, it's my lunar return. But they're not always like that either. There are times when it's like, ah, yes, I feel like myself today. So I don't know. I think like leaning into it, maybe depending on, what house that is in your chart, like doing a deep dive on something that has to do with that, honoring like the Scorpio nature of like curiosity and like the depth. And also just like taking it easy. I think like, the moon, like you wouldn't choose that for an election, right? Like you wouldn't choose that to like probably start a super important project, and like that is getting a little bit into like the good and bad scenarios, but like we can also translate that just to the everyday of like there are supposed to be times where we don't do things too, and the moon is really good at telling us when that is. So yeah.
That's really a really important point. Like rest is resistance for sure. And I think yes, Scorpio's a really good time to go in and reflect. And sorry, I'm just thinking to what we said about the third house and where it finds its joy. I guess you working with Taurus energy must feel even more nourishing when the moon's in Taurus, because then it's in the third house where it finds joy, kind of opposing your moon. So you've got that kind of duality that happens each month as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm also in a Taurus perfection year that I just started at the end
Oh,
of October. So I'm
perfect.
excited see how it goes.
Oh, the third house. Yeah, that's a great perfection. Yeah, so I hope that goes well as well. And it's been ruled by Venus as well, so that's lovely. What about you, Helen? Do you kind of do anything that works well with the Scorpio moon?
Yes, I think I love what you were saying about honoring what Scorpio Moon is and brings. I think for me, I always feel it when I think maybe partly because I have the natal placement, but I can feel the emotional tonal shift immediately when the moon moves into Scorpio, and I think even just being aware of the fact that that's going to bring heightened emotional sensitivity is really helpful because you can then reinterpret or more softly interpret whatever experiences that you might have. And as you said, Janessa, you might adjust your expectations for that couple of days in terms of what those days might be good for. And I think another thought that I have just comes back to what we were talking about earlier around needs, because I read something interesting recently. It was within psychology, but coming from within a mindfulness perspective. And the idea was about how we interrupt ourselves, and we interrupt ourselves before we get what we need regularly and in various ways, processes that would be quite straightforward in many non-human animals, or maybe when we were younger, that of I need a glass of water, I'll go and get a glass of water. It's that simple. As we become socialized in more complex ways, we learn interruptions to those patterns, that we don't straightforwardly seek what we need anymore because we've learned not to in some way or whatever shape. I think that's for everyone, not just Scorpio moons. But certainly when the moon's in Scorpio might be as good a time as any to sort of think about that, to think about tuning into those essential needs that we have in the moment, in any given moment, and just honoring those.
Oh, that's beautiful. I think it's funny because both of you have talked separately around this, realizing that you have to kind of put yourself first in terms of needs and sitting with the uncomfortableness of that and feeling that that's okay to do that. So I love that you've both kind of come to that in different ways. I think it kind of harps back to that resourcefulness and not really needing that support, but actually being able to kind of give it to yourselves. No, there's been some really good tips there. Things that, we've got this Scorpio moon coming up, obviously next week. So I try and be intentional around what the moon is doing. And I think we are allowed to rest guilt-free. It's more and more difficult to do that in the world that we live in, but it's great that we are in such a supportive community that kind of supports that and brings out the best in terms of being able to honor ourselves. I've really enjoyed talking about this. I could talk all day about it. I don't know if either of you have got anything else you want to add. Janessa, it's been an absolute pleasure having you join us. Where can people find you to connect?
Yeah, it's been awesome to connect with you all too. Before I say where people can find me, I wanted to share with you both that I pulled some cards before we hopped on our call,
Oh,
and
exciting.
it makes more sense now that I know where Helen's placement is. But the first two were the third decan of Scorpio and the first decan of Scorpio, where both of our moons are.
Wow, I've got goosebumps.
And then I pulled one more. This is kind of, I typically pull two cards in the morning. I will do, I'll ask what should I focus on today, and then how should I do it? And so I pulled Helen's for first as what I should focus on, and then how should I do it? It's like, okay, through my own moon. And then I just pulled one more. I was like, okay, what do I need to know about this recording? Like right before we got on. And of course I pulled the death card. So this card
Wow.
was, yeah. So I just thought that was perfect. Three Scorpio
Wow.
in a
That
row.
is so perfect.
Amazing.
Love
Uh,
that.
but yeah, as far as where you can find me, I'm at By Jove Astro on Instagram. I have a Substack. It's By Jove Astrology. And the best place of all really is my website, byjoveastrology.com. I've got lots of things there. I do readings. I have recorded readings, which have kind of been more where I've been steering my practice. Um, And then, yeah, I've got like a podcast. There's all kinds of stuff you can find that's all on my website. So, yeah.
Right. And yeah, I've listened to some of your podcasts. I can't remember if it was the one where you were kind of talking about Jupiter in Cancer, and it was just so warming. I think you've got, I don't know if it's the Pisces rising, but a very soothing voice. So yeah, definitely check her out. It's been great to have you on, and it's also been great, Helen, having your personal take too. It's been good to kind of compare and contrast and see how differently, the same moon can show up in different charts. So yeah, no, thank you both. Join us next time as we explore the moon in Sagittarius.